While Jesus lived, no one made a record of his face. In his time, no one made a picture, nor a sketch, nor a painting. Since then, every image of Jesus came from the minds and hands of those who lived after he died. Jesus lived in the Roman era, and the Romans were tolerant about religion. All gods were equal in the empire and the heavens. Everybody's deity was welcome. This affronted the Christians and Jews who believe there is only one God, he who rules both heaven and earth. All others were false. The Romans were pagans. The Romans found Christian thought dangerous. From the Roman Forum, it was announced that specific Christian practices were threatening to the state. The early followers of Christ held secret services underground, burial particularly. The corpses were placed in underground tunnels called catacombs. Early Christians, by tradition forbidden to portray a graven image, at first too poor to pay for great art, scratched graffiti, signs that announced Jesus. A fish was the Greek symbol for Christ. The anchor was the hidden symbol of the cross because the cross was for criminals. The first figurations of Jesus date from about 320 AD in the style of the ancient world. Curly hair, no beard, an astonished shepherd boy. The first look of Jesus Christ. When Christianity grew rich and powerful, the bewildered boy Jesus would be inappropriate. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, abandoned Rome. For military and political reasons, he moved his court to Asia and built Constantinople. Rome was falling. No longer could Rome carry the weight of the world on its shoulders. But when Rome was lost, the great art of the ancient world went into the shadows. The freestanding statue would disappear for more than 1,000 years. Christianity rose because the pagan gods offered neither military nor spiritual protection. A sterner God was needed. For more than 1,000 years, the grace and beauty of the human body would be seen as decadence. Spirit would replace flesh. The first time he called upon the Christian God, Constantine won a battle. He converted to the new faith on his deathbed. In the East, the domed Roman basilica became the architecture of the Byzantine church. In the highest part of the building was placed the new image of Christ. Like the Emperor Constantine, who ruled by decree, Jesus has the book of judgment in his left hand. His right hand gives a blessing. Christ as judge. With only small variations, this image echoed into all the lands surrounding the Mediterranean. In Egypt, parts of Italy, in Greece, in Russia. Even today, this dark and bearded image is the central Christ of the Eastern Church. The prevailing look of Jesus is judgmental. In the West, Christ crucified became the more prevalent theme. Christ on high, surrounded by his disciples. As history separated East from West, the Eastern Church evolved an art rich in color, elaborate. Small pictures called icons were placed close to the congregation. These icons were usually the work of monks. They were often painted on wooden panels protected by a wax coating. This art caused a civil war in the East. Some of the faithful fell down before icons, kissed them, carried them in processions smoking with incense and lit by candles. This veneration horrified others who said only God was to be adored, not representations, even of Jesus or Mary or the saints. John of Damascus answered that to the illiterate faithful, these images were to the eye what the word was to the ear. This argument reappears in the whole history of Christianity. As earthquakes and wars swept through Byzantium, the schism grew deeper. Those who were opposed to icons said the troubles were caused by the worship of graven images, and the only way to be saved was to destroy the objects. A hand-lettered page from an early manuscript. Churchmen, at the height of the controversy, those who would destroy the icons were called iconoclasts. Here, the image of Jesus is being speared by an iconoclast. The Roman legions never crossed the Irish Sea. The early Irish pictures of Christ are inventions of the monks who did. What Christ in flesh might have looked like was of no concern to them. Their work was to preserve written civilization by copying and illuminating great books. 600 years after Christ died, his image was an ornament, a pattern without pain in the intricate Christianity of the Middle Ages. On an island near western Scotland, Iona, a group of monks began copying the Bible into what is known as the Book of Kells. Now the look of Jesus came from the letters that make up his name. The letters X and P in Greek stand for Chi and Rho, Christ in Greek. See the X, the Chi, surrounded by patterns done by a monk gone mad with design. See the P, the Rho. The human figure is the least of forms in the pattern. The world of the Middle Ages was cruel, painful, without safety. Inside the monasteries, the design of heaven could be symbolized. The 8th century, the look of Jesus in color, the back of a jewel-bedecked Bible. Red rubies stand for his blood. The front, framed by 4 blue pearls, Christ is alive, open-eyed, feeling no pain, triumphant over death. The hue of each jewel had a meaning: white for purity and joy, blue, the color of heaven and truth, gold, divine intelligence. Usually the stained glass windows told the story of Jesus, but these tell the deeds of Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. His alliance between the military and Christianity echoed ancient Rome under Constantine. It would soon be the theme of the Crusades and the wars to come against heathen and heretic. In the Middle Ages, the story was secondary. In the days when the cathedrals were white, the most important color was the light of heaven that flooded the house of God. Rich cathedrals could afford stained glass windows. The poorer churches put the look of Christ on their walls with a painting technique called Fresco, fresh wet paint mixed directly into fresh wet plaster. Before the artists were allowed to use paint, they were required to make a black and white sketch of the proposed work. This cartoon was called a synopia. Here a synopia directly from the early 13th century. Quick, fast strokes, easily understood today. Here, the final painting. Not today. Jesus of the 13th century. Sometimes the craftsman's sketches were refused by the authorities. This painting is severely edited. It is the moment when Christ is conceived. The angel Gabriel has just announced to Mary that she is to bear Jesus. Gabriel is impassive. Mary is humble. In the lower right of the painting, there's an area of muddiness, as if something had been reworked. When the outer layer of the fresco was peeled away, the original cartoon showed the artist's intention. This Madonna is reluctant. She's frightened that destiny has chosen her to be the one woman in the world to be the mother of Christ. The authorities didn't want a troubled Mary. The artist had deviated from the pattern. His job was to execute, not to create. In the Middle Ages, individualism in art was blasphemy. This is the Mary they wanted: blank, flat, obedient. Then came a painter who broke the patterns of officially sanctioned art: Giotto. For many people, he is the most important painter in over 1,000 years. He returned to painting something that had been lost since the ancient world: the depiction of human emotions. One of his greatest masterpieces, Lamentation. It's not quite real, but its humanity is readable. It is man's fate wrapped in Christ's fate. Christ in his mother's arms. No one had painted in three-quarter face since Rome fell. The heads are not only round and full, they show emotions. Later, he painted Mary's wedding procession. Again, something new. By painting gowns that exhibited volume, Giotto affirmed there were certainly female bodies, full figures under the robes. He hinted 3 dimensions: space. St. Francis of Assisi exorcising fiends. Giotto didn't know how to solve the problem of perspective, but he knew it was there to be solved. The demons of hell. Hell was about to strike the civilized world. 9 years after Giotto died, bubonic plague swept the West. 40% of all Europeans died of the affliction. It was the plague that held back the Renaissance. It was the plague that reminded Christians that hell was there and just as vast as heaven. In the centuries to come, the fear of hell underlay painting, sculpture, and literature. Christ, eyes closed, his humanity unable to cope with hell on earth. Painted after the plague by Jerome Bosch, who asked, if evil existed, how could an all-powerful Jesus permit it to exist? Bosch distrusted both God and man for their weaknesses. He painted sin. Bosch's depiction of the concerns of late medieval man. In the center, wounded and pierced, is the risen Christ. Around him, the 7 deadly sins. Envy, avarice, gluttony, sloth, lust, pride, anger, the Middle Ages ended first in the city-states of Italy. Venice, Florence, Milan grew rich from trade with the East. Not only new riches, but a new idea about the nature of heaven. A new philosophy proposed that God had given man the opportunity to rise above his sin and guilt if he labored to do it. A person's goodwill and good deeds might help him towards immortality. The nobles and merchant class of Italy took this to mean they might enter the kingdom of heaven by enriching their churches and public places with elegant art. The most famous competition in the history of art took place in Florence. These doors were the work of the winner, Lorenzo Ghiberti, a goldsmith. It was usual in the Middle Ages that a craftsman put a small personal mark somewhere near the work he had done. That's what Ghiberti did. He put himself in the frame around the religious images, and not so modestly. Ghiberti, the winner, the seer. Graceful, delicate, Michelangelo was to call Ghiberti's scenes the doors of paradise, the crucifixion. An annunciation. These doors mark either the end of the Middle Ages or the beginning of the Renaissance. Ghiberti worked on 3 sets of doors for 50 years. He put his aging self into the last set. Now painting was about to move into depth. The greatest pictorial achievement of the Renaissance would change the look of Jesus. Perspective. This Annunciation begins at a single point behind a tree. All the lines converge to that single point to create linear perspective, the illusion of depth. Three-dimensional space has been captured on a two-dimensional surface. Painting perspective accurately was an idea that had never existed before. It was unknown to any previous culture, and it is still absent from the art of all non-Western civilizations. From the nail holes in Christ's feet to his slightly oversized head is an exercise in foreshortened perspective. Christ by Mantegna. The new humanism found a new way to portray the death of Jesus. One of the greatest masters of perspective was a military engineer with a specialty in hydraulics. He was fascinated by human anatomy, and he wrote, "The human body is a creation of the divine mind." He was commissioned to do a fresco for a church to be placed on a wall near the area where the monks ate supper. He drew anatomically correct sketches. When he was ready, Leonardo da Vinci transferred the sketches and painted the Last Supper. Faded, almost gone, the central image of Christ in the High Renaissance. Only Christ is in repose. He has just said, "One of you shall betray me." All the other figures swirl in physical and psychological movement. Perfect perspective. Jesus' head is at the point of infinite convergence. A sketch from a lesser-known painting by Leonardo. Jesus holds the Lamb, Mary holds Jesus. At a later time, Leonardo simplified the sketch. In the final painting, he sweeps upward from the Lamb, Jesus, and Mary to the enigmatic smile on the face of Mary's mother, St. Anne. The Da Vinci smile is that of irony and intelligence combined. Though he was the leading artist and the leading scientist of his century, the smile suggests that Leonardo knew the boundaries of human aspiration. The smile seems to say, through his intellect, man may enter the natural world, but the world of nature is filled with as much mystery as the world of the spirit. St. John the Baptist. The same smile that marks the line between mystery and reality. Recently discovered these small terracotta pieces. The left leg was the model used by Michelangelo when he began a study of Mary with the dead Jesus. Giotto, the most famous religious sculpture ever made, finished before he was 25. Jesus just dead, caught in marble, the expanded veins of the arm. The stone made flesh. young Jesus, young Mary, young Michelangelo. A half-century later, another Pietà. The sculptor said the essence of the work was already in the stone. Take away all the stone that has nothing to do with the truth, and trapped inside the marble is the Pietà, waiting to be set free. Michelangelo's self-portrait at age 66. At age 88, 8 days before he died, another Pietà. Unfinished, Michelangelo's last statement in stone. Now the stone is made into spirit. Two bodies are one. Mary supports Jesus, Jesus supports Mary. The Sistine Chapel. As a young man, Michelangelo had painted the ceiling with scenes from Genesis. For 4 years, he lay on his back, paint dripping on his face, his skin diseased by plaster. He fell once from the scaffold. Some 30 years later, with reluctance, Michelangelo accepted a commission to paint on the back wall of the chapel the largest fresco of the century, The Last Judgment. Originally, he painted Christ in the nude. A later generation drew the cloth over Christ's thighs. One arm draws some figures into heaven, the other sends the damned to hell. Michelangelo had been betrayed by the clergy, his lovers, and his patrons. He was swept by guilt and remorse. He placed himself in the painting at least twice, once among the damned. North of Italy, the vision of Christianity was changing. Trinitarian Christ, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, all in one. Much of the controversy to come centered on how to portray the look of Jesus. Albert Dürer painted himself as Christ. Devoutly religious, he believed every Christian was an imitator of Jesus. And so his self-portrait was painted as homage, not as blasphemy. The invention of woodcuts and printing was technology that changed theology. For over 1,000 years, the rich and the clergy had influenced the image of Jesus. Now, simple woodcuts, all these by Dürer, were bought by illiterate thousands. For the first time, pictures of Jesus could come into the home. The first mass communication medium was the woodcut on paper. The religious wars broke out in Germany during Dürer's time. Catholic against Protestant, princes made war for territory under the guise of serving their God. He who ruled the state chose its religion. Dürer's devout and mysterious woodcuts were used by both sides. On his deathbed, Henry VIII, the king who made England Protestant. A propaganda picture from the mid-1500s. The dying Henry delivers the new religion to his son. The Church of England was inserted between the Pope and the English people. The king would lead the state's new religion. The prince treads on the representative of the Vatican. No papal flesh was to stand between man and God. In the window, the sketch of Jesus is under attack. Jesus is being speared. The graven image was not to be tolerated, not even if it was the image of Christ. Protestants contrasted the poverty of Christ on a mule with the richness of the Pope on a fine horse. On the Catholic side, the greatest of artists was pressed into the religious conflict. El Greco's The Allegory of the Holy League begins in heaven. The light of Christ falls on the black-robed figure of the King, Philip II of Spain, blessed by the Pope. Behind Philip, the open mouth of the shark of hell swallows the Protestant hordes. Long after the religious wars ended, Queen Victoria sending the word of Christ to Africa. Behind her, Prince Albert. For the Victorians, empire meant Western trade and Western civilization joined with Western Christianity. European art had few black faces. The most common was that of one of the three kings who came to adore the newborn. Until the age of colonialism, Jesus and Mary were always white, mother and child. When Christianity came to dark people, mother and child changed color. Not only mother and child, often Jesus became black. When missionaries sent back art from colonized countries, the church authorities were shocked. In Asia, the images of Christ's blood and suffering were found offensive. In this early Chinese drawing, mother and child were acceptable. Jesus on the cross is kept quite small. The white missionaries are dressed like mandarins, complete with fan. In this art, there are only subdued references to the violence Christ underwent. The anti-Western Chinese resisted the missionaries. Lord in Chinese dialect sounds like the word for pig. That's how Jesus is portrayed on this cross, as a pig. Chinese rarely embrace in public. Because the Christians did, they were considered proponents of free love and free sex. If the West painted him on canvas, then the East could paint him on silk. If every man had Christ in him, then Jesus could be Chinese. Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. The artist may have been Asian, but he knew the symbols of Christianity. In the Italian tradition of visual storytelling, the boy carries a beam as an omen of the cross he will carry as a man. In America, the first Protestants abandoned the Gothic stone cathedrals of Europe. The upward lines were copied in wood. Inside and out, simplicity and literalness, so that no image stood between the believer and his God. When the settlers moved west, they faced not only a wilderness, but old and forceful religions. Christianity moved through North America, carried by the Spanish in the Southwest, the French in Canada, the British and Dutch from the Atlantic seaboard. They found America was more than a country, it was a continent. What the original Americans worshipped and how they portrayed their gods varied from group to group. Eternity spoke to them through the many spirits of the land, the rivers, the seas, the seasons, the animals. For Christians, so many gods, so much animal worship was pagan. Two spiritualities collided. Native art and Christian art would adapt uneasily to each other. On America's northwest coast, the spirits of nature were represented by masks and by puppets who danced on strings. The voice of the native priest, the shaman, spoke through the puppets or through the carved animals. A puppet. Jesus wears his crown of thorns. When he speaks, his crown lifts. There's a frog in his mouth who tells a story. The frog and the puppet's hands tell of the miracle of the loaves and fishes. In Northwest Native culture, totem poles were carved to show which clan the builders belonged to, the gods they worshipped, the animals they held sacred. A totem pole converted to Christianity. In medieval European symbols, original sin was represented by the skull of Adam, supposedly buried on Golgotha. The totem pole becomes the crucifix. The look of Jesus shows the pain of conversion, a new religion gripping old beliefs. The crucifixion is the central symbol of Western Christianity, the portrayal of a God who felt the same pain humans feel makes it the most powerful image in Western art. A Mexican Indian wove a crucifixion in wicker. A Swedish sculptor carved a Nordic Christ. There is no cross, but the spike in the hand is the suffering of God as man. A modern Italian enlarges pain, magnifies it beyond torture. The Dead Christ by Paul Manet. Manet, the first impressionist, Manet, whose nude shocked the art world, said his duty was to paint Jesus at least once because Christ was the greatest symbol in art. Fashionable Paris was appalled by the look of death in Jesus' eyes. He looks too much like a corpse, a critic said. A friend said, "You've got it wrong. His wound is always placed on his right side." Paul Gauguin, Green Christ. Gauguin broke with the Impressionists, left his wife and his profession as a banker, and spent his life painting the spirituality of the people who lived in Brittany and the South Seas. Gauguin, the Yellow Christ. The Yellow Christ again, but Gauguin puts himself near the crucifixion. Gauguin paints himself as Christ. The painter's hair was red, and Jesus has the artist's features. It was too close to escape criticism. For a time, the painting was withheld from exhibition. Van Gogh and Gauguin, both critics of the social and artistic world of their time, worked together in the south of France. In his lifetime, Van Gogh finished this one religious painting. More conservative, more pious, Rouault. In the 20th century, he is both modern and medieval. The black lines were suggested by the lead connectors that separate the glass panes in stained windows. The 20th century, Marc Chagall. Chagall's cultural background was Russian Jewish. Under commission, he did a stained glass crucifixion for the Rockefeller Chapel in New York. Yet without commission, he painted a Pietà for himself, for the same reason Manet had painted his Dead Christ. Even if Chagall was not a Christian, Jesus was a symbol that no great artist could avoid. When he was young, Pablo Picasso painted realistic religious scenes. In his middle age, he painted this crucifixion. The point of view is that of the Roman soldier whose ladder-like sword has pierced Jesus' side. On the cross, a head with a tiny dot, is Picasso's self-cartoon. His toothy tormentor is his wife Olga, who hounded him for money. Salvador Dali, a Spaniard, a surrealist, and one of the most controversial painters of this century. Crucifixion. The woman is his wife, Gala. The Last Supper by Dali. Christ in heaven looms above Christ on earth. He has been resurrected. The miracles of the Sea of Galilee are represented by the water and boat. Jesus himself is in part transparent. This is what Christians believe. They believe that some 2,000 years ago, God sent his only Son to earth to redeem mankind. The day the Son of God was born is called Christmas. Rembrandt painted the infant Jesus. De la Tour. The sleeping Savior. Christ's mother was a mortal woman named Mary. De la Tour again. Tiepolo painted three wise men who came to adore Christ. Even as a child, the Son of God was wise enough to bless them and show them the way to live. Mantegna. Velázquez, mother and child. Zurbarán. In the visual legend of Jesus, the early years are only briefly sketched. Christianity teaches that even as a young man, Christ, who was born a Jew, added a new way to an old way. William Holman Hunt. El Greco. The faith is founded on the teaching and events of Jesus' life. Christ was sometimes an indignant reformer with a mission. The religion has to do with the moral behavior of man on earth. Christ and the woman taken in adultery. Titian. El Greco imagined a Jesus who came to earth to die and knew in a garden the night before he died that he would suffer. Christians believe he died for them. If they believe in him and follow his teachings, their sins will be forgiven. They will be redeemed forever. El Greco. While Jesus lived, no one made a record of his face. No sketch, no painting, no photograph. The look of Jesus has been created by man. The face of every Jesus you see was made by someone's mind and hand. Famous artists and unknown artists from different places and different ages. 15th century France, oakwood. 20th century Italy, mosaic tile. 20th century America, paint on wood. 19th century Melanesia, wood. 20th century Africa, ivory. 12th century Italy, bronze. 20th century New York, paint on a slatted steel door. 20th century Yugoslavia, bronze.